catastrophic first meeting. An ordinary auto repair worker entered the establishment. The wheelchair-bound company executive had given up hope of experiencing joy again. The man's harsh words sliced through the restaurant atmosphere like a blade. "Hold on, you're using a wheelchair. This has to be some kind of prank, correct?" Silverware clattered to a halt. Discussions ceased abruptly as every patron turned toward the corner booth, where a woman with flowing chestnut hair sat in an elegant custom mobility chair. Victoria Sterling maintained her composure outwardly, though her fingers pressed against the table's surface. Her expression remained controlled, but internally something sharp twisted. She had understood this outcome was possible when agreeing to the meeting. Nevertheless, the rejection stung deeply. "Listen, this is ridiculous," the man continued, rising from his seat. "You're supposed to be the woman from the dating application. You never mentioned being—" He gestured dismissively toward her chair. "Damaged goods." Audible gasps rippled throughout the dining room. A nearby server stood frozen in place. A couple whispered frantically behind their menus while stealing glances. Victoria straightened her posture with dignity. Her voice emerged low and steady. "I wasn't aware I needed to provide a medical disclosure for casual conversation. If you came seeking fantasy fulfillment, I'm clearly not your match." He released a cruel laugh that carried across the room. "You're absolutely right about that. You're definitely not." Then, speaking louder for the entire restaurant to hear, "I thought I was meeting Victoria Sterling, the pharmaceutical company's CEO, the brilliant biotech innovator, not some charity case looking for sympathy." There it was, the revelation. He had known her professional identity all along, and now every other patron in the establishment knew as well. Whispered conversations erupted around them. Someone discreetly raised a phone camera. Another diner mouthed silently, "Is that really her?" Victoria sat perfectly still. Her business blazer was impeccably tailored, her hair styled professionally. She appeared every inch the powerful corporate leader she was known to be. Yet in this moment, she felt reduced to a vulnerable young woman, wounded and exposed for public examination. "What a disaster," someone muttered from a nearby table. Her fingers gripped the armrest of her chair tightly. She reached for her handbag, preparing to leave alone with whatever dignity remained. Then a calm, steady voice cut through the tension. "I believe that's quite enough." Every head in the restaurant turned toward the entrance. A man stood in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a faded denim jacket and scuffed work boots. He moved with quiet determination, his eyes focused not on the man who had caused the scene, but directly on Victoria. He walked past the stunned hostess and approached her table. His hand came to rest gently on the back of her chair. "Are you ready to leave?" he asked softly. Victoria blinked in surprise and confusion. Was this another elaborate, cruel joke at her expense? But his gaze was steady and kind, not pitying, just genuinely present and caring. She gave a small nod of agreement. The stranger turned to face the man who had humiliated her. She deserves considerably better treatment than this. With that simple statement, he carefully turned her chair and guided her toward the exit. No one attempted to stop them. No one dared to interfere. They left behind a restaurant full of stunned silence and the lingering image of a man who hadn't needed to raise his voice, only his presence and moral courage. Outside, the evening air felt cool and carried the faint scent of approaching rain. Victoria felt the tension in her shoulders beginning to dissolve. He released his gentle hold on her chair once they reached the sidewalk. "I apologize for interrupting," he said. "I couldn't simply stand by and watch that treatment continue." She looked up at him, noting his stubbled jawline, the oil stains on his collar, the tired but kind eyes. "You don't even know who I am," she said quietly. He shrugged with simple honesty. "Didn't need to know. Basic human decency doesn't require an introduction." Victoria exhaled slowly, feeling some of the pain beginning to ease. "Thank you for that." He smiled warmly. "I'm Ryan, by the way. Ryan Cooper." Despite everything she had just endured, a soft, surprised laugh escaped her. "Victoria, it's a pleasure to meet you, Ryan." They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, surrounded by the usual sounds of city life as her heartbeat gradually returned to normal. "I never got the chance to eat," she admitted. "Skipped lunch to prepare for, well, that experience." Ryan glanced back at the restaurant they had just left. "Doesn't look like you missed anything worthwhile." After a brief pause, he continued, "There's a food cart about 2 blocks from here. Nothing fancy, just honest food. But their grilled sandwiches have quite a reputation in the neighborhood." She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "That sounds perfect." He grinned. "Excellent. Let's go." For the first time in a long while, Victoria found herself following someone not out of fear, obligation, or social expectation, but by genuine choice. Because sometimes healing begins with disaster, and sometimes the right person appears precisely when the world seems to turn its back. The evening breeze carried the mixed scents of rain-dampened pavement as Victoria moved slowly down the quiet street. Ryan walked beside her, hands casually tucked into his jacket pockets. He didn't hover anxiously or push her chair unless she requested assistance. He simply walked at a steady, unhurried pace that naturally matched hers without any apparent effort. "Did you manage to eat anything before the incident?" He trailed off, his voice careful and considerate. She shook her head, a small smile appearing on her lips. "I didn't exactly have the opportunity." He chuckled softly. "I figured as much. There's a street vendor about 3 blocks away. Nothing elegant, plastic chairs and paper plates, but their grilled meat skewers are genuinely worth trying. Would you like to give it a chance?" Her instinct was to decline politely. She was accustomed to private dining rooms, carefully curated menus, and the constant weight of professional expectations. Street food represented something she hadn't experienced in years, but the warmth in his tone, casual and completely without pressure, made her reconsider. "Why not?" she said simply. "Perfect," he replied, a genuine smile breaking across his face. "Because I was already planning to head there myself." They turned the corner and discovered a modest food stall illuminated by strings of warm yellow lights. The air filled with the aroma of garlic, soy sauce, and grilled meat. Families occupied mismatched stools while laughter and the gentle clinking of bottles wove through the night atmosphere. Victoria felt simultaneously out of place and oddly comfortable in this unpretentious environment. Ryan ordered for them both 2 meat skewers, fried dumplings, and a bottle of sparkling water. When the plates arrived, the server moved clumsily, and a streak of thick sauce slipped from one skewer, splattering across Victoria's shoe and ankle. She froze completely. Heat rushed to her face. This was precisely the kind of accident she dreaded. Moments that highlighted her chair, her differences, her inability to react quickly to unexpected situations. She braced herself for awkward apologies, for the server's flustered pity, for Ryan's uncomfortable silence and possible retreat. Instead, Ryan calmly reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded cloth, the kind an auto mechanic might habitually carry. "Hold on," he said quietly. Before she could protest, he crouched beside her chair. With easy, unhurried movements, he carefully dabbed the sauce from the leather of her shoe. Then, as if it were the most natural action in the world, he gently lifted her foot, supporting it with both hands, and placed it back onto the footrest of her chair. Not a hint of hesitation, not a flicker of pity or discomfort, just care, respect, and practical kindness. Victoria's breath caught in her throat. No one had touched her like that, with such natural ease and respect, since before her accident. Every gesture from others had been heavy with awkwardness or saturated with condescending pity. But Ryan's touch was different. Steady, practical, genuinely kind. Her eyes stung unexpectedly. She blinked rapidly, willing the tears to stay hidden. "There," he said simply, straightening up. "Good as new." She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it, unsure what words could adequately convey the depth of her gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered finally. He shrugged lightly. "It's just sauce, no big deal." "No," she said, her voice stronger this time. "It isn't just sauce." Their eyes met across the small table. For a moment, the chatter of other diners, the hiss of the grill, the clatter of chopsticks, all of it faded into background noise. Victoria saw in him something she hadn't expected to find. A man who looked at her without hidden agenda, without judgment or calculation. She realized with a sharp ache in her chest that this was the first time in years someone had treated her as complete and whole. Not defined by what she had lost, but recognized for who she actually was. Ryan broke the silence with a smile, gesturing toward the skewers. "Better eat before it gets cold. Trust me, food like this doesn't wait around." She laughed softly, a sound she barely recognized as her own. She took a bite, and for the first time that evening, tasted something simple and real. Garlic, ginger, the char from the grill. It wasn't just food. It represented freedom from expectation and pretense. Sitting under the glow of yellow lights across from a mechanic with grease still visible on his hands, Victoria Sterling, CEO, survivor, woman, felt something she hadn't experienced in years. She felt truly seen and accepted. The days that followed weren't marked by grand romantic gestures or expensive gifts. They were simple, gentle, ordinary, in a way that felt rare and irreplaceable. Ryan and Victoria began meeting more frequently, first by seeming coincidence, then by quiet mutual intention. Neither verbalized it directly, but each encounter drew them into a rhythm that only they seemed to understand. Sometimes it involved a leisurely walk, or as Victoria jokingly called it, a slow roll, through neighborhoods where food carts glowed warmly and children danced to street musicians. Other days they shared snacks on park benches, watching life unfold in all its messy, beautiful complexity. One evening, they passed a young violinist performing under a street lamp. His instrument case contained only a few coins. Ryan dropped several bills inside and turned to Victoria. "Want to sit and listen for a while?" She nodded agreement. They didn't speak much during the performance. The music filled the comfortable silence between them. As the final note faded, Victoria noticed her hands were clasped calmly in her lap, not from habit or anxiety, but because she had genuinely relaxed her guard. Every shared moment became a quiet thread in something delicate that was slowly forming between them. At a cinnamon pastry stall, Ryan reached over and wiped a bit of powdered sugar from the corner of her mouth. She tensed initially, then laughed, loud and free. "I used to hate that," she said. "People touching my face like I couldn't manage it myself. But with you, it doesn't feel like that." "Feel like what?" he asked. "Like pity or condescension?" He didn't reply with words, but his eyes communicated everything she needed to hear. That night, Victoria returned home and opened her sketchbook for the first time in 5 years. Her hands moved with unexpected purpose and clarity. She drew Ryan crouched under a streetlight, sleeves rolled up, tools in hand, helping a stranger with a stalled motorcycle engine. She captured the quiet focus in his expression, the strength in his posture. There was no performance in him, no ego or self-consciousness, just genuine care for others. When she showed him the drawing several days later, he stared at it for a long time. "No one has ever drawn me before," he said, barely above a whisper. Something about his voice, genuine surprise and disbelief, affected her deeply. She had been painted by famous artists, interviewed by major media outlets, followed by photographers, but Ryan had lived quietly in the margins, unseen by the larger world. "Then I'm honored to be the first," she said. He smiled, small, shy, and handed the drawing back as if it were something fragile and precious. They spent an afternoon at a neighborhood festival, watching children run with balloon animals while elderly couples swayed to a jazz band. On the way back to her apartment, Ryan hesitated, then pulled something from his jacket pocket. "I got you something," he said. She tilted her head curiously. "Another cinnamon pastry?" He laughed. "Not this time." He held out a small, hand-tied bouquet of wild daisies, slightly uneven, a little wilted from the sun, but completely real and authentic. Tucked between the stems was a folded piece of notebook paper. Victoria unfolded it with trembling hands. In his rough handwriting were the words, "You deserve to be seen as yourself, not as a chair or a condition." She couldn't speak immediately. The tears came quietly, without drama. For years, she had been admired, obeyed, even feared in professional settings, but not truly seen as a complete person. People noticed the CEO, the headlines, the wheelchair, the corporate success story. Ryan saw Victoria, not her company, not her past trauma, not her physical limitations, just her authentic self. When she looked up, Ryan's expression was uncertain, unsure if he had said too much or crossed a boundary. But she didn't leave him wondering for long. "That's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever said to me," she whispered. He nodded, his voice soft. "It's simply the truth." As the sky darkened and string lights began flickering on around them, Victoria leaned her head gently against his shoulder. She didn't know where this relationship was heading. She didn't know how long it would last or what challenges they might face. But for the first time in years, her heart felt full, and the world, once cold and sharp with judgment, began to feel warm and welcoming again. The night was unusually still, the kind of stillness that made every soft sound feel closer and more intimate. They sat side by side on the rooftop of Ryan's apartment building, legs stretched out comfortably, backs resting against old lawn chairs that creaked gently with each breath. A small Bluetooth speaker hummed quietly beside them, playing soft jazz and acoustic covers that blended naturally with the evening breeze. Ryan handed her a cup of warm apple cider, his fingers brushing hers briefly in the exchange. Victoria murmured a quiet, "Thank you," her voice nearly lost to the wind. He didn't push for conversation. He never pressured her to fill silence with words. They sipped in comfortable quiet until the song changed, and Victoria finally spoke. not with grand declarations, but with a gentle memory. My mother loved this melody, she said softly. She used to sing it while brushing my hair every night. Same time, same tune. Ryan turned slightly toward her, listening attentively. I was 16 when I told her I didn't want to pursue music anymore, that I wanted to study business instead. She didn't argue or try to change my mind. She just said, "Whatever path you choose, walk it with your whole heart." A faint, bittersweet smile touched her lips. And I did exactly that. I built the company, broke industry records, became the youngest CEO in our sector. I did it with everything I had, but she wasn't there to witness any of it. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unresolved grief. I used to believe that if I worked hard enough, succeeded loudly enough, I could somehow drown out the guilt and emptiness. She continued. Ryan set down his cup and remained silent, offering presence rather than empty platitudes. She already saw the part of you that mattered most, he said quietly after a moment. Victoria blinked, her throat tightening with emotion. She did see that, she said softly. And I think I forgot who that girl actually was. Gentle silence returned between them, not heavy or uncomfortable, just peacefully shared. Then Ryan spoke. I left college, he said. Mechanical engineering program, had a full academic scholarship. She turned to him, genuinely surprised. My sister had a baby, then experienced a relapse with addiction and disappeared completely. My mother was already battling illness, so I stepped in to help raise the child. Got a job at the auto shop, changing diapers between oil changes and brake repairs. He gave a dry chuckle. Not exactly the future I had pictured for myself. Victoria reached out and touched his forearm, the first time she had initiated physical contact. That must have been incredibly difficult. It was challenging, he acknowledged. But that kid became everything to me. He saved me in ways I never expected. They stared ahead again. Two people who had experienced profound loss and discovered unexpected forms of love. Later that week, Ryan sent a text message. If you're free tonight, I want to show you something special. She was available. He picked her up in his old pickup truck, carefully helping her into the passenger seat before securing her wheelchair in the truck bed. They drove quietly through winding roads as city lights gradually faded behind them. When they stopped, Victoria's breath caught in recognition. The old stone bridge, she began. Your favorite childhood spot, Ryan finished. I remember you mentioning it. Her eyes widened in surprise. I researched the places you talked about, he explained. You said you used to come here with your mother, that it was your dream to walk across it someday. Her voice cracked slightly. I can't walk across it now. I know, he said gently. But we can still cross it together. He opened her door, retrieved the wheelchair, and guided her carefully onto the walking path. The bridge wasn't particularly long, but it arched gracefully in the middle. From the highest point, the river curved below them, framed by trees that bowed like protective guardians. They stopped near the center of the span. I always imagined holding her hand here, Victoria whispered. I thought maybe if I returned, I would feel her presence again somehow. Ryan said nothing in response. He simply took her hand in his, warm, steady, reassuring. I don't feel alone anymore, she said. He turned to face her, his eyes soft with understanding. You never were alone. On that quiet bridge, Victoria finally understood something she hadn't grasped before. Healing doesn't always arrive in dramatic gestures or grand moments. Sometimes it comes wrapped in shared silence, in gentle hands, and in someone who sees you not for what you've lost, but for who you truly are. The text message had remained unanswered for days, then stretched into a full week. Victoria stared at her phone screen, thumb hovering over the same message she had rewritten multiple times. "Hey, are you okay? Did I say something wrong? Can we please talk?" All marked as delivered, none marked as read. Ryan had vanished completely. It made no logical sense. Their last evening together had been quiet and gentle. He had kissed her hand goodnight and whispered, "You matter more than you know." But now, nothing but silence. She scrolled up through their message thread, reading previous conversations like someone trying to remember what happiness had once sounded like. Then suddenly, a new message appeared on her screen. "I met someone else. You deserve better than me." 8 words. No punctuation, no warmth, no explanation. The breath left her body entirely. Her hands trembled as she lowered the phone to her lap. Outside her apartment window, the world continued its normal rhythm. Cars passed by. Someone laughed on the street below. A dog barked in the distance. But inside her apartment, she felt broken all over again. The memory of her mother's funeral blurred together with the moment her father had told her she would never find someone willing to carry her dead weight. And now, even Ryan, gentle, honest, caring Ryan, had apparently proven her father correct. She didn't cry immediately. Instead, numbness settled over her like a heavy blanket. She rolled her wheelchair to the living room, turned off all the lights, and sat alone in complete darkness. Meanwhile, across the city, Ryan wiped blood from his split lip and pressed an ice pack against his swollen jaw. His auto repair shop was quiet now. The other workers had gone home hours ago. The fluorescent light flickered overhead as he slumped against the metal tool drawers. His shoulder throbbed from where one of the men had struck him twice with deliberate force. He hadn't seen them coming. Just 2 men in expensive suits waiting in the alley after his late shift ended. No conversation or negotiation, just fists and a clear warning. "You don't belong in her world, mechanic. Walk away now." One of them had spoken her name specifically. That detail made his stomach twist with dread. These weren't random criminals. They had been sent by her father. William Sterling knew about their relationship. Ryan sat with this knowledge like a stone lodged in his chest. He hadn't known Victoria's complete identity until the previous week. The CEO position, the family legacy, the billion-dollar pharmaceutical empire. She had mentioned running a company, but not that particular company. He had never researched her background online. He hadn't needed or wanted to, but someone at the shop had shown him a business magazine with her photograph on the cover. "Isn't that your girlfriend?" They had joked. He had smiled and nodded, but something inside him had turned cold with realization. And now this physical confrontation and threat. Pain shot through his ribs as he leaned forward to grab his phone. He opened Victoria's messages and read every single one. His fingers hovered above the screen keyboard. He wanted desperately to reply, to explain everything, to tell her that none of this separation was her fault. But he stopped himself. How could he drag her into his world of financial struggle, overdue rent, and violent confrontations in dark alleyways? She deserved someone who could protect her from these realities, someone who didn't have to choose between dignity and basic survival. So he made the cruelest choice he could imagine. He lied to her and told himself it was for her own protection and well-being. Back in her apartment, Victoria sat in darkness long after her phone went silent. The ache wasn't solely about Ryan's departure. It was the terrible familiarity of abandonment. People always left eventually. Her mother through death, her father through emotional withdrawal, and now Ryan through conscious choice. The worst part wasn't the absence itself. It was how quickly the silence rushed in to fill the empty spaces. She finally wheeled herself into her art studio, staring blankly at an unfinished sketch on her desk. Ryan under streetlight, adjusting the wheel of a stranger's bicycle, unaware she had been drawing him from memory. She tore the paper from the sketchbook, crumpled it roughly, and let it fall to the floor. But even as it lay there broken and wrinkled, she couldn't shake the memory of his hands lifting her foot so gently at that street food stall. No words, no hesitation, just pure care and respect. She had trusted that moment completely. Now she wasn't certain what had been real and what had been illusion. The rain fell relentlessly, creating a steady curtain that drenched the empty streets and washed the entire city in dull gray tones. Streetlights blurred into soft halos of gold as water streaked down every visible surface. Rooftops, windows, pavement. Victoria didn't care about getting soaked. Her cardigan clung heavily to her skin. Her hair, once elegantly styled, now lay plastered and heavy across her shoulders. Water dripped steadily from her eyelashes, soaking through the blanket she had thrown over her legs before leaving the apartment. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to move, had to breathe, had to feel anything other than the sharp ache clawing at her chest. The wheels of her chair spun slower with each city block, dragging against the wet sidewalk. Her hands, pale and trembling, gripped the metal rims as she pushed forward with determination. Each breath came sharp and labored. Rain mixed with tears until she couldn't distinguish one from the other. Ryan's text message echoed repeatedly in her mind. I met someone else. The lie felt too clean, too cold and impersonal. It didn't sound like him at all. She knew it wasn't him speaking. And yet the silence had been undeniably real. The absence, the abandonment, again. Her throat ached with the weight of everything left unsaid. She turned onto the familiar street near Ryan's garage, more from muscle memory than conscious intent. Her heart knew the way there, even as her mind tried desperately to forget. The rainfall intensified dramatically. She paused under a flickering street lamp, blinking through the haze of water. Her hands slipped on the wet metal rims. Her breathing became irregular, and then, headlights. A car approached fast, too fast around the corner. Its tires screeched against the rain-soaked asphalt. Victoria tried to move out of the path, her hands scrambling against the wet metal, but the wheel caught on a crack in the pavement. The car swerved wildly, a horn blared urgently, and then strong, familiar arms were lifting her, pulling her up and away in a single, powerful motion. The world tilted completely. Rain exploded around them both. The next thing she knew, she was held tightly against a warm chest, the full impact of what could have happened hitting her all at once. She gasped and looked up. Ryan! His face was completely soaked, his hair dripping, his eyes wild with fear and adrenaline. His chest rose and fell in short, panicked breaths. I saw you crossing the street, he said, his voice raw with emotion, and then the car appeared. God, Victoria. Her bottom lip quivered as her eyes filled again with tears. You left me, she whispered. You abandoned me. Ryan's arms tightened protectively around her. I thought letting you go would protect you, his voice cracked with pain. I thought if I disappeared completely, your life would stay safe, untouched by all the chaos that follows me. She stared at him, stunned by this revelation. "The message," she said, voice choking. "You lied to me." His nod was small and tortured. "I couldn't tell you the truth. Your father sent people after me, told me to leave you alone permanently. I didn't want you caught in the middle of that violence." Victoria's hand gripped the front of his soaked jacket tightly. Her entire body shook, not just from the cold, but from the torrent of emotion crashing through her. "You think I needed protection from you?" she said, voice rising. "What I needed was honesty. What I needed was you." Ryan closed his eyes, his forehead coming to rest against hers. Rain slid down both their faces like falling stars. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I was wrong." Her fingers rose to his face, gently brushing away water that could have been rain or tears. Then, without thinking, without fear or hesitation, she leaned forward and kissed him. There in the middle of the empty street, soaked to the bone, hearts pounding, breath shaking, she kissed him with everything she had. It wasn't graceful or perfect. It wasn't quiet or controlled. It was everything, all the pain, all the waiting, all the walls crashing down in one soft collision of lips and trust, and finally choosing love without shame or apology. When they broke apart, their foreheads remained pressed together. "Ryan," she whispered, "I don't care about money, about public image, about what the world thinks I should be." Her voice trembled, but her eyes held steady. "I want this. I want you." He released a shaky breath. "You're going to catch pneumonia," he said. She smiled through her tears. Too late for that. He looked down at her with such tenderness that her heart nearly stopped. For the first time since the night she had rolled away from that restaurant in humiliation, Victoria felt completely whole. They remained like that a moment longer, the world softening around them in the rain. Somewhere in the distance, a car door slammed. A dog barked. Life resumed its normal patterns, but in that moment, everything had changed forever. The grand hallway of the Sterling estate felt colder than usual. Marble floors stretched endlessly beneath crystal chandeliers that sparkled like ice formations. Victoria's wheelchair moved silently over the polished surface. Ryan walked beside her, his hand steady and reassuring on her shoulder. He had never belonged in a place like this, and he knew it clearly. But he didn't flinch or retreat. At the end of the corridor, her father waited like a statue. William Sterling stood near the massive fireplace, arms crossed, eyes sharp with disapproval. He didn't move when they entered the room. His gaze flickered from his daughter to the man beside her and darkened with anger. "I see you've brought him here," he said flatly. "I have," Victoria replied. Her voice was calm but absolutely unwavering. "Because I want you to look at him when you explain why I don't deserve happiness." William's jaw tightened visibly. "That man has no place in your life or your future." "He has more of a place than anyone else ever has," she said firmly, "including the men you tried to arrange for me to marry." William stepped forward aggressively. "You are the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical company. Your life is not entirely your own to control. You're responsible for an empire. You're a Sterling." Victoria drew in a deep breath. Her hands gripped the wheels of her chair, knuckles white with tension. Then slowly, she looked up and said what had weighed on her chest for years. "I never asked for any of this legacy," she said clearly. "I inherited it. I worked for it. I honored it faithfully. But I won't let it define whether or not I'm allowed to be happy." William's expression cracked only slightly. "And what?" he said bitterly. "You'll give it all up for him?" "If that's what it takes," she answered without hesitation. "I will." Ryan turned toward her, startled. "Victoria!" But she held his gaze steadily. "I mean every word." Her father stared at her for a long time, his eyes, once so full of fire and ambition, now dimmed with disbelief and disappointment. "Then leave," he said at last. "If you walk out that door, don't expect to walk back in." Heavy silence fell over the room like a thick curtain. Then, without a word, Victoria turned her chair toward the exit. Ryan followed, pausing only to glance back once at the man still standing frozen in his world of marble and crystal. He said nothing. Outside, the evening air was thick with the scent of pine and distant rain. The sky had darkened, but the clouds had not yet opened again. The path leading down the driveway glistened under the streetlights. They moved together in comfortable silence. When they reached the end of the driveway, Victoria let out a slow breath. "That was easier than I expected," she said. Ryan didn't respond immediately. Then, as they reached the edge of the property, he stopped walking. She turned to look at him with concern. "What is it?" Ryan crouched slightly so they were at eye level. His hands, rough from years of manual work, found hers, still cool from the night air. "You shouldn't have to give up your entire life for me," he said quietly. "I didn't give up my life," Victoria said with conviction. "I walked away from a prison I had mistaken for a legacy." She paused, then continued more softly. "You gave me the courage to want more than just survival." He looked at her with glassy eyes and parted lips, overwhelmed by her words. "I don't need the whole world," she whispered. "I just need you there when I fall apart." Ryan swallowed hard. Instead of answering with words, he simply took her hand and held it tightly. He didn't need to speak. His eyes said everything. "I'm not going anywhere." The sun cast a warm, golden glow over the garden behind the old auto repair garage. Ivy climbed the brick walls while wildflowers lined a wooden archway decorated with hand-tied ribbons and fresh daisies. String lights flickered overhead, swaying gently in the breeze. It wasn't grand or luxurious, but it felt authentic and real. 3 months had passed since Victoria Sterling walked away from her father's estate. Today, surrounded by potted plants, borrowed chairs, and soft jazz playing from a speaker positioned on the garage steps, she sat in her wheelchair, genuinely smiling. Ryan stood nearby, adjusting the collar of his white dress shirt. It was wrinkled despite his best efforts, but she thought he looked more handsome than any man she had ever seen in an expensive suit. Their small engagement ceremony had drawn just a handful of people, friends, neighbors, and co-workers from the garage. But the space felt full of warmth, laughter, and people who had come not from obligation, but from love. Maya, Ryan's niece, stood proudly as the flower girl, wearing a daisy crown and carrying a basket that had once held car parts. Victoria glanced at the simple card table holding a modest white cake, 2 champagne glasses, and the bouquet Ryan had picked himself from a corner flower shop. She hadn't cried all morning until she saw a familiar figure at the edge of the garden. William Sterling, her father. He stood uncertainly, not in a formal suit, but in a plain gray sweater and casual slacks. His hair was grayer than she remembered, his posture uncertain and out of place. The music softened. Conversations hushed. Ryan straightened with tension. Victoria's breath caught in her throat. William stepped forward slowly, stopping directly in front of Ryan. The silence felt tight and dangerous. Then he extended his hand. "Love her well." That's all I ask." Ryan stared in stunned surprise, then shook his hand firmly. A wave of gentle, genuine applause rose around them. William didn't smile, but his eyes found Victoria's, glassy and searching for forgiveness. It was enough for now. She looked away, blinking hard to control her emotions. Later, after the cake was cut and guests wandered to the benches in the backyard, Ryan approached with a quiet grin and held out his hand. "Come with me," he said. She tilted her head curiously. "Where to?" He only smiled and guided her wheelchair down a narrow path behind the garden that led toward the beach beyond the property. It wasn't a famous shoreline, just a quiet stretch of sand where the water met the shore in slow, rhythmic waves. At the water's edge, he stopped and turned to her. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. He nodded, then knelt in front of her chair. With gentle strength, he helped her stand. Her legs trembled with uncertainty, but his arms held steady and secure. She leaned into him, fingers gripping his shoulders, his hand firm at her waist. The sand felt soft beneath her bare feet, cool and grainy. It clung to her skin like a distant memory. Victoria gasped softly. Tears blurred her vision. "I haven't felt this since," she began. "You don't have to say it," he interrupted gently. They stood like that for a long while. Her first steps on sand in over 5 years, each one small but entirely hers. She looked up, cheeks wet with quiet tears. "You caught me when I was falling," she whispered, "in every possible way." He brushed her hair from her face tenderly. "And I'll be here for every step that follows." She pressed her forehead against his. "I love you. I love you more." The breeze rolled in from the water, carrying salt and softness in the air. The waves whispered their eternal rhythm. Together they took another step forward. No audience, no spotlight, just the beach, the breeze, and the beginning of something entirely new. In that moment, under the wide open sky, Victoria Sterling finally felt what she had been searching for throughout all those years of striving and proving herself. Peace, and the courage to believe this wasn't an ending, but a beginning. Sometimes the most profound love stories don't begin with fairy tale meetings, but with disasters that reveal who people truly are. Sometimes healing comes not from being rescued, but from being seen and accepted completely. And sometimes the greatest courage isn't in never falling, but in choosing to trust again after being broken. Love doesn't always arrive in the form we expect, but it always finds its way to those who remain open to its quiet miracles.